Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and I'm delighted today. It's a Friday, and I'm delighted to be joined by Chris McElwain and, of course, Alan Morrison. We're here to talk about all things Celtic. Chris, is there much to discuss? What do you fancy talking about here for the next hour?
Well, not much has happened. I mean, even the last 24 hours have just been boring. Not seen anything. Yeah, it's been good. I mean, sometimes you get into these international breaks or you get the postseason or whatever, and you do sometimes look for things to talk about. But we're in the midst of managerial, recruitment process. Possibly, we're talking about new managerial candidates. We're talking about some of our players on the international stage. Coming up against the world superstars like Ronaldo and coming off best, which is nice to see. And we're also talking about I don't know. There's this wee thing that's trending on. Oh well, there we go. There's Leo Scalacci, fantastic.
There he is.
Absolutely.
Always rated, Leo. Yeah.
I'm trying. I wish you would do one of them for me, actually. Give it to my wife. But there's a wee thing that it seems to be blowing up in social media. This wee thing. Apparently, there was a wee discussion that let's just say didn't go the way I think the presenter intended.
No, we could touch on it because and I think Alan's probably been put in this position himself, when you are a guest on another show, it's sometimes difficult to get the full context of the point across because you're having people interrupt you. You're only on for a couple of minutes, so you can make points that might seem a little bit opaque to the listener. So I suppose I could expand on some of the points I was making. And we'll touch on it because there has been quite a lot of focus. But hell meant anybody to try and criticise Celtic or Scottish football, Alan. That's all I'll say. We're all right to do it within the realms of our own podcasts. But the minute someone from the outside starts poking fun at Scottish football, there's a proper pile on, Alan. Did you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was going to say, I don't think Scottish football, Twitter or X, is any more or less vile than any other league. I mean, if you've ever seen, Manchester United, Liverpool, Arsenal fans going at it, they're just as vile as anything that we can come up with. But this season, obviously, there's so much going on. It's such a tumultuous season in Scottish football in general, and because of the way the algorithm works, I don't really understand it on X, but my timeline's full of St Mirren and Hearts fans at the moment, giving it to Celtic fans large. Like, it's just a constant stream of abuse to Celtic fans, etc. So yeah, it was quite funny to see everyone suddenly unite
I know,
against this. I don't know, this no mark that you was foisted upon you, Paul, by Sky Sports. So let me say, Sky Sports are an absolute disgrace. I was just thinking before that we joined there. Do you remember, at the turn of the century when Sky Sports and you had Richard Keys and Andy Gray calling the Premier League the best league in the world when it objectively was nowhere near the best league in the world at that point. The money wasn't that much of a differential. All the talent was in Italy and Spain, etc. At that point. But when you had a Glasgow derby on, Martin Tyler was the commentator. You'd have Martin Tyler and Andy Gray on co-commentary. That was their A team. Would be commenting on those matches in Scottish football. And we all remember the team that Celtic had under Martin O'Neill, the players that we had, how that compared with English Premier League players. I think it's the anniversary of the victory in Blackburn on the way to Seville today. Beating Liverpool, of course. We all remember the Rangers team, the EBT All Stars with half the Dutch national team. There wasn't a lot in it really in those times, and it's changed mainly because of the differential in Sky TV money. Now, some of that is just market forces. Some of it is due to the incompetence of the officials running Scottish football to fail to negotiate better TV deals for Scottish football. But some of it is down to Sky Sports using its enormous influence and power to essentially, to treat Scottish football, to dampen it down, and to the extent now that Scottish football is essentially a schedule filler for them. It's something to slot in on a Sunday when they have anything else to show, or on a Monday, or whatever, whenever it is, there's a quiet spot. There isn't a League One match to show or whatever. So they're an absolute disgrace. But as I always say, always believe people when they reveal themselves, and the contempt for Scottish football is very clear.
No, it is. You're right. It's a schedule padder at times, Alan. And again, some of the points I made, and I'll expand on them here because we've got the time to do so. And obviously, you can describe the context in which you're making the points. Is the reason I mentioned the money in the bank? That was one thing that people thought was pointless, because I criticised Celtic for having the money in the bank. The reason I criticised Celtic is because there is no plan for that money in the bank. That's the big issue here. Now, if Celtic had a vision, 5 years, 10 years, whatever length of vision it is. I know we keep going back to Liam's vision of Japanese football being 100 years, and they're 30 years into it. Now, I don't have an issue with that, because 30 years ago was 1995. 30 years ago was the first time Dermot Desmond actually invested in buying Celtic shares. And I say invested because he gets a dividend out of Celtic. He takes something back out of the football club year on year. And that 30-year period is merely a generation. Now, I'm hoping that I'm around for another one or two of them. So another 30 years, you should have a plan for that. You should have a plan beyond, the next transfer window. And that was my frustration with Celtic, having all that money in the bank, £77 million plus, with no real plan. But the reason I brought it up is because, as we know, the English Premiership was flooded with broadcast money. And I remember it. You guys will remember it. And by the way, I bought into it. I remember the Alive and Kicking video. Remember that, where I think Gordon Jury was the Spurs player, and every team had a player and they were all getting warmed up. Gordon Strachan was the Leeds player. I remember all that, and I used to tune into it. But since then, the English game has been bankrolled by broadcasting money, right? And yes, the global brand has benefited as a result of that. Flip it on Celtic, flip it on its head. What I could have said to Mr. O'Hara yesterday is, what team do you support? Spurs. All right, well, Celtic have got more CSCs in London than Spurs have got. You could have turned it around like that. The reason I mentioned the money is because this daft argument about Stockport or Scunthorpe or Southend or whatever team coming into Scottish football and winning the Premiership is nonsense, as I said yesterday. But the reason I mentioned the money is because if you take any of these big English clubs, right, with contracts for players, and you place them in the Scottish Premiership, they'll go bust. Because the Scottish Premiership doesn't have the broadcasting deal and the sponsorship capabilities. If you take Celtic in its current form, with all our contracts for players and staff, and place us in the English Premiership, we will survive. And then once the broadcasting money comes in, right, we will be able to compete with some of the larger clubs when it comes to transfers. And that's the point I'm making. That's how stable Celtic are versus a lot of these English clubs. That's why the parachute payment's so big, because there would be apocalyptic financial situations for many of the clubs being relegated from the Premiership. But they forget it, because for a generation they've been very cash rich and all this money and all the glitz and everything else. But I think Alan makes a pertinent point here, Chris. We should, as a game, as a Scottish game, be looking at what is it that makes Scottish football unique? What is it that makes us so special? I keep going back to it's the fans. We are the biggest supported league, right? If you look at the population, right, per head, we are the biggest supported league in Europe constantly, right? So in terms of that, come away from this padding out the schedule of Sky Sports. Come away from that, right? I think, what did we get? 30 million quid? I think that's the deal.
Yes,
right?
something ridiculous.
It's a drop in the ocean, right? And we need to look at a different structure, which would benefit not just Celtic, benefit Scottish football. And it's been an argument for many, many years, Chris. But in terms of what we're doing, we're not in a great season. We're not in a great season. And we'll talk about some of the things we're unhappy with, Chris. But the broadcasting deal's been a talking point since way back. Since, remember, SPL TV was mooted. I think Roger Mitchell was behind that, in actual fact. You might follow him on Twitter or LinkedIn. But yeah, Scottish football, there is nothing like bringing Scottish football together, Chris, than someone who has got no knowledge of Scottish football having a pop at us. But we do need to have a look at the TV and the broadcasting deal. Celtic have got a global reach. And when you look at our TV money coming in, it's nothing. It's buttons.
Yeah. I don't have any issue with someone making observations about our game if they're doing it from a position of being informed, if they've got knowledge of that subject and they can demonstrate that in their argument. None of that came across yesterday from Jamie O'Hara. Jamie O'Hara had a very limited footballing career at top level at Spurs. Other than that, he spent most of his time in the lower leagues. And to the best of my knowledge, he never set foot in Scottish football. I'm happy to be corrected in that, but I don't recall Jamie O'Hara having any.
He ate some hot wings the other week. That's as close as he came.
Hot wings, did he? What, his local Glasgow Nando's or whatever, fine. But the point is that, you know, if you're going to make an argument, at least put some credibility behind it and put some structure to your argument, which is what you did with your counter argument yesterday. Now, look, Scottish football is what it is, right? We have a couple of clubs with what I would consider significantly higher profile than a number of clubs that benefit from English Premiership membership or broadcasting rights. You know, we have teams with European pedigree far more than many of the clubs in England do, which is, you know, that pedigree is very much monopolised amongst a select few. You know, we've got Celtic, we've got Rangers in the prior incarnation, Dundee United, Aberdeen, all of who made an impact in Europe over the past, 50 years or so, right? And I'm not going to go back and talk about all those glory days and things like that. But the point is, we've got clubs like Celtic, which have a profile that if they were to stand on equal footing to a Manchester United or a Manchester City or a Chelsea or a Liverpool down in the Premiership, with all the benefits that come from that, we would at least stand alongside them, if not in a matter of years exceed them, because, as you say, of those elements to that profile, the fan base, the global reach of our brands, the merchandise opportunities, the opportunities to attract big investment in that. We don't currently have that platform. We punch above our weight. We punch above our weight in terms of our European profile, because we're in a league which, I think you're right, doesn't take advantage of the unique selling points of a Scottish league, which you're right, it's grassroots football, it's homegrown, it's the fan passion, the fan commitment to their club. We probably self-harm a little bit as a footballing nation. We probably have too many small provincial clubs. Maybe we need to, you know, look at how do we make our league more better structured? How do we maximise the potential that we have? So, you know, we don't do things necessarily right. But for someone to come in and just be so condescending, so arrogant about, yes, Celtic will never attract a top manager. Look at who you're attracting. Stockport would come up and you know, win the Scottish Premiership. You know, what are you basing that on? What are you basing that on? Are you basing that on Joey Barton coming up here and saying he was going to tear it up? We saw how that one went. You know, another
one who's dropped out of social media yesterday.
Absolutely, you know, and just it's the absolutely uninformed, absolutely zero credibility, arrogance, and condescension that will unite a footballing population like the Scottish football fraternity. Now, not everybody, you know, we've still got our detractors. That's absolutely fine. But if you're going to come at us, just be prepared that we're going to fight back, and we're going to fight back passionately and strongly, because that's what we do in Scotland.
Yeah, exactly. And there's lots to be, I think, enthusiastic about when it comes to Scottish football. No less the actual supporters and the fan base, history of many of the football clubs. But Alan, when we're talking about attracting managers, I think what we need to do, and this is where the tagline comes today, is it's all about modernisation. And I think that we've been given an insight into one element, because it's about maximising margins. So if you're a smaller, I mean, bigger and smaller, everybody's talking about this. I mean, size matters and all that. When they're talking about football clubs in Scotland and they're talking about maximising all the different areas, there's one club who are all obviously getting a lot of plaudits, and quite rightly so, and that club is Heart of Midlothian, right? And they're sitting top of the league. And what they've done is they know they don't have the fan base that Celtic has, or their ability to maximise the profit on match day due to the size of the stadium or the global reach, etc., etc. But what they can do, Alan, this is what they have done, is they're focused on certainly one element, and it's one element that I've got to say you are the expert in this room on, and that's data analysis. So I've spoken a lot about recruitment, data-driven recruitment. I find that absolutely intriguing, where, you know, you could identify a player based on what you need. I mean, it makes so much sense. But that player might not be on your doorstep. He could be in a league somewhere far, far away, in a galaxy far away. But he is the right fit for your team. So you've got the recruitment side of it. You've got the performance side of it. So you're looking at the data for the performance of your players and the development of your younger players. And then, of course, you can analyse the opposition based on data analysis. So a club like Hearts, I'm not a fan of Hearts. I'm not a fan of some of the toxic chants that here at Tynecastle. But what I will say is I applaud them on the fact that they have focused on this, Alan. And it was not before time that Scottish Football Club took that approach. It's going to be difficult, I think, for Celtic to do anything other than basically try and go toe-to-toe when it comes to analytics. I don't think we're doing it at the moment based on the type of player that we're bringing in, Alan. Or would you disagree with that? And would you say that we are bringing players in, but they're not being utilised or even used properly by the manager who has been in place? What's your take on this? Are we bringing in players and it's a data-driven model and they're not being used properly, or are we just not doing it well enough?
So we don't know, absolutely. My take on it is probably predictably, it's many of these things can be true all at the same time, and it's a matter of degree and it's a matter of attribution. So a few things to throw into the mix. One is that Celtic, and we had Ted Knutson, who was one of the co-founders of StatsBomb, on the Huddle Breakdown. We did an interview with him. He very kindly came on. Brilliant guy, and he revealed that Celtic were one of the first clubs in the world to adopt StatsBomb data. And I would say, and I'm not saying this because I have access to it through Celtic Way. I'm saying this because I've looked at a lot of these platforms. Is that I would say StatsBomb has the richest data base of those that I have seen. I'm not saying it's the best in all regards, but it's certainly the richest, and it's got really interesting things on goalkeeping, for example, and their on-ball value model is very interesting, I think, as well. So Celtic have had those capabilities. They've got an analysis department. They have staff that do this. Paul Tisdale is somebody who is claimed to have built a player profiling model, and I presume that he's brought that with him into this role. So in theory, these things are in place. It's not that they don't exist, but as I've said many times, the trick with this stuff is to knit it together into an organizational culture and an organizational structure that means that the right people are doing the right things, information is flowing in the right way in a timely manner, etc. And I can see people's eyes are going to sort of start to flicker now, because this is all really boring, but it's utterly necessary. To get all this stuff to work, it requires you to really organize yourselves in terms of modernizing your structure in a way that you cannot have the Alex Ferguson model in this day and age where one person is over every single footballing decision in the club. It's just not feasible to do that. The world's too complicated. Football's become too complicated. The finances of it have grown hugely. All the sort of legal risks, the contract risks, the commercial risks, the PR risks. All of these things now are so complicated that you need specialisms, you need experts in all of those things, in legal, in marketing, in commercial, in contract law, etc., etc., etc. And guess what? You need football people to concentrate on the football aspects of it. So all of those, and that's the sports science, it's the medicine, it's the training, it's the preparation, it's the cool down, it's the recovery, it's the facilities, it's the kit, it's what the gym does and doesn't do, how that's laid out, what equipment there is, it's the nutrition, it's the diet, it's all of these things. There's experts in all these things, and you need all of these people to be a successful modern football club. So unless you do not have all of those things in place, and even if you have them all in place, even if you have if somebody showed me the operational blueprint that said these are all the roles in Celtic, they tick all the boxes, these are the roles and responsibilities, they all align correctly, it can still fail if you don't have the right people in those roles, and it can still fail if those people do not work together effectively and it runs smoothly. So an example of an organization that does exactly what I've just said would be Bodø Glimt in Norway, that Knutson is the manager of. Yeah. So is Knutson a successful football manager because he's a brilliant coach and a brilliant tactician, or is he a successful football manager because he operates in an ecosystem that is coherent, joined up, everyone's going in the same direction, and everybody knows what they're doing, and they have the same strategic goals. And if they have to sell a player, they all agree they have to sell a player. If they buy a player, this is the profile that they're buying. That's the operation. That's the operating environment he operates in. If you take him out of that and put him into Celtic, will he be successful? I have no idea. Possibly not. Probably not. Actually,
Mhm.
right? So let's look at the lad Wilfred Nancy, right? He's at Columbus Crew. Columbus Crew are, and this is thanks to James, my friend James on Huddle Breakdown for the information I'm about to share. Columbus Crew have something like the 18th highest wage bill in the MLS now, and as we all know, the teams with the highest wage bill tend to finish higher, and they generally finish in the order that their wage bill, order of their wage bill, unless you're Manchester United. There's always an exception.
Mhm.
They have the 18th highest wage bill, and they won the MLS Cup a couple of seasons ago, and they're the 7th ranked team in the MLS. So they are overperforming relative to the resources that they have. How much of that is down to Wilfred Nancy as a head coach and a tactician, and how much is it down to the management and organisation of Columbus Crew? They have a very well respected analytics department, for example. I don't know what other aspects of the club, how they are. If you take Wilfred Nancy out of Columbus Crew and put him into Celtic, will he be successful? I have no idea, but I suspect not, because he doesn't. Well, he won't have all these other things around him that
Mhm.
allow him to be a successful football coach and a good tactician. And this is my point. This is why I've not really been commenting. Almost don't care who the names are that are come up, unless you don't have all the things I've talked about. And my frustration is there's no evidence we're moving in that direction. And in fact, it's almost worse in some cases. We've got some of the pieces, but we almost like we're just paying lip service to it. It's not coordinated. It's not joined up. It's not we don't take it seriously, because ultimately one person's going to decide who the manager is on whatever whim they decide, and none of that stuff is taken into consideration, I suspect, when that decision is made, and that's the frustration.
That is, and I think the main point today, the main word in our tagline is modernise, modernisation, Chris. So even if you do then, let's say you do attract a manager like Nancy, a manager like Knutson, and I'm using those two names because they have been quoted as contenders for this job, and you bring them to Celtic, you bring them to the table, they are going to be asking, because they're modern coaches, they're going to be asking, what is your ecosystem looking like? What is your structure looking like? And if you don't have these things in place, I'm not going to be putting all my hard work at risk because you guys aren't prepared for what I do. And this is the massive thing. Listen, we look back on a time when Celtic won the European Cup in 1967, and we had a physiotherapist who had absolutely no idea about physiotherapy, who owned a heat lamp, who often, when that heat lamp was on a player's knee, the cigarette ash from his cigarette would fall on the other leg of the footballer. Yet, despite all that, and despite Barrowfield's training ground looking like a quagmire of mud, right? Despite all of that, Chris, we won the European Cup. We've moved on from that. So what is described there by Alan is a modern football club. And more modern football managers want to walk into that environment, don't they?
They do. It's a new generation, a little bit of a new breed of football manager or football coach. And I think, Alan, I think really articulated that absolutely spot on for me, because it's the operation now has to be a cohesive, aligned unit. And one key component of that is the football manager, the football coach. But the football manager and the football coach is no longer one of these, he's the boss and he has the final say on everything. It's no longer like that. It's about, he plays his key role. It's the, tactics. It's maybe the, setting up the training routine, setting expectations about his players. Becomes a manager not only of the players, but of the other areas of the football department, which he depends on. And you're right. I mean, we've taken some criticism for maybe putting scorn on the idea of a Wilfred Nancy coming in. It's nothing to do with Wilfred Nancy, the man, or the coach, or his capability, but it's about, do we have the environment that would allow a coach like Nancy to come in and actually thrive and actually be successful? And what we base our, I guess, cynicism on is the fact that this season we went into a European qualifier without a right winger and without a striker. That doesn't give you confidence in one element of the football operation, one key element of the football operation, which is recruitment. We talk about player identification. Well, we've seen, evidence that our prior manager was at odds with what the club hierarchy wants to do in terms of player recruitment, in terms of spend, in terms of. So you've got all these misalignment, all these evidences of misalignment within our football structure. Now, Nancy could be the next Mourinho. He could be the next Xabi Alonso at Leverkusen. He could be the next Jurgen Klopp at Mainz. But the only way he'll get the opportunity to demonstrate that is if we put him in an environment that allows him to thrive. And our concern is that we don't currently have that environment. And we're seeing evidence of that through our manager leaving. We're seeing it from statements from the minority shareholder, the largest minority shareholder. We're seeing evidence of it from meetings with CEOs and CFOs, which aren't really giving us a lot of confidence. We're seeing it with what we see on the park in terms of having a depleted, lower quality squad than what we finished the season with. So there are all these evidences that we can point to, and so it makes it very, very difficult to have an informed, confident opinion on whether one manager is going to be better than the other. Because, as Alan quite rightly said, it's about bringing a manager into an environment that enables him to be successful, him or her to be successful.
No, without a doubt. Thank you, everybody, for your brilliant messages coming through. I don't want to bring them all up because I'll look like an egotistical maniac, but thank you very much for all your kind words. Got to thank you for that. The interesting thing is when they talk about Scottish football, talk down their nose at Scottish football. Things like some of the most successful managers within the English game came from, let's say, unfancied leagues. So they came from unfancied Scottish football. Sir Alex Ferguson being a notable example of that. But then even just Liverpool last season, I'm just having a quick look at Liverpool, who obviously won the Premier League down south, and you're looking at the fact that they've got a Scotsman playing for them in Andy Robertson. They've got Virgil van Dijk, who a big part of his development came through Scottish football before he went to Southampton. They're trying to pull for Scottish youth by taking in players like Calvin Ramsey and Ben Gannon-Doak. Yeah, so we're good for something, Chris. We're good for something when it comes to English football. Arsene Wenger didn't come from a fashionable league, did he? When he went to Arsenal, he did all right at Arsenal, I think.
It's almost like just a case of, and sorry, I know Alan will jump in here as well, but it's just a case of when I was listening to O'Hara talking about the level of league, and I was thinking about, we've got Ange Postecoglou. Now, Postecoglou, has got his detractors down there, but he still went down there and won, Spurs' first European trophy in X amount of years in the second season. Came from being successful at Scottish football. He was under scrutiny even coming into Scotland. Right, so maybe it's misdirected. You talk about David Moyes, very successful. I watched a documentary the other day on Leeds when they first signed Gordon Strachan. Who was told his time was up at Manchester.
Revelation, absolutely,
and what a revelation he became. So that we need to get away. We really need some of these pundits, as they were, to get away from this elitism, right? Because it's misdirected, it's a stereotype, and it has no basis in fact or history.
No, you're right. I'm talking documentaries. Obviously, King Kenny came out just recently, and I've got a big poster over there, the Three Kings. A lot of talk about kings and sirs. Sorry, guys. Matt Busby, Paul Shankly, Jock Stein. So, yeah, we've done all right. I think I'm going to bring in as many comments as I possibly can. Alan's already stated, without the functioning department, is going to be very difficult to say, I quite fancy that manager, because we don't know if he's going to work within the department we've got. And if they're obviously modern thinking managers and they want to come to Celtic to benefit their own careers, because let's be honest, a lot of players and managers are doing that as well. They don't want their career to go off track because we're not prepared for what they're bringing to the table, and that, I think, is why we need to modernise this club. What are they faced with? Let's think about that. So let's say you're one of these managers, Alan, and you're meeting with Celtic in London, or with the power of Zoom or some other dial-in app, right? Because that's obviously how we spoke to Ange Postecoglou, and you're asking Celtic, right, what's your structure? Let's try and figure out what our structure is at the moment, right? So you've got a head of football operations with Paul Tisdale, who will be part of these discussions, we are led to believe. And you would expect him, as Kevin Graham quite rightly said the other day, you would expect him to be part, because that's his role. He's the head of the football department, if you like. You move into the scouting department, right? What you got there? Well, we've got a few scouts. We don't even have a leader of the scouting team. We don't have a head of scouting. And that's more or less it, right? So what about transfers? How do we deal with transfers? What have we learned, guys? We've learned that in order for any transfer to go through, the guy that's the talent spotter, apparently the identifier of talent, is Paul Tisdale. The club told us that directly. And then the manager will be able to sign off the signing. But there's another layer to that. So the guys doing the deals, once we get to the sticky point, the guys that are doing the deals obviously are the CFO and the CEO, but they don't have autonomy. They've then got to run it past other executive directors. So the whole thing seems a bit convoluted, Alan, to any manager aspiring to progress with a football career at the moment.
Yeah, and this is it. And a smart person will dig into all of those things. And as you intimated, it's a two-way interview. You're as much trying to find out what this club will do for you and your career as what you will do for them. I mean, that's always the basis of a healthy interview in any walk in life and any job situation, to be honest with you. So yeah, they're all fair questions, and I don't think some of these things are not going to change, especially around the final sign off, and especially around just the quality and the talent of the people that ultimately are going to influence your role, i.e., those senior C-level executives who seem to be in place, for reasons maybe beyond their abilities, but their ability to do the job that they're being asked to do by the shareholder, not necessarily the job that they should be doing if they were given autonomy to perform their roles free from interference. So that's all dysfunctional, and that's never going to work. And I don't think we're going to, as we know, we're not going to fix that in the short term. But what I would hope that even would be beyond the influence of Desmond is the actual football operations. I mean, surely he's not going to be concerned with what scouting software we use, or how the scouting department is structured, or what the head of scouting is saying, and all that sort of stuff, how they interact with the analysis department, how they interact with the legal team, etc. I imagine that surely that has to be beyond. So I would have thought there's some ability for us to get all of those things right. I also would be very careful about not, used this phrase a few times this week, of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We don't really know, I would suggest, what Paul Tisdale's specific role is, nor what his level of influence and success in that role has been. I mean, I think we can all pass judgment based on sort of being quite remote from it in terms of judgment on certain players. But if you'd said to me at the beginning of the season, what's Callum Osman going to be like, what's Jamal Simpson's-Pusey going to be like, what's Benjamin Negron going to be like, I would have said that there are three examples of players that look quite interesting and potentially very useful, that under Brendan Rodgers, not so much Negron, but the other two, we just simply never got to see. Now, so is that because of Brendan Rodgers, or is it because of Paul Tisdale? I think there's increasing evidence that we had somebody in the football department, i.e., the manager, who was kind of riding roughshod over the rest of the football department. So that's not healthy either. So somebody like a Wilfred Nancy, probably from what I can gather, wouldn't be that sort of person. He would literally be what they call the head coach, as opposed to a manager. Well, Celtic have never had a head coach in their history. So what's suddenly going to change at Celtic to make the head coach model work, whereby he concentrates on coaching? I'm sure he has a say on recruitment, profiling, all that, undoubtedly, but his primary responsibility will be to put a football team on the pitch that wins football matches, and all the other stuff he supports but doesn't necessarily lead. We've never had that model before, so how's that going to work? So that and if I was him, just to use that, because I think it's a useful example. And by the way, just for the record, I think he would be a great step forward for Celtic. I think there's a clear evidence he improves football teams beyond the resources that they have. I think tactically he's interesting. The way he speaks about the game is very modern, and so forth. So, to me, that would be an indication that Celtic have moved away from, oh, we'll get Brendan Rodgers in. Brendan Rodgers, to me, was somebody who was far too expensive and was on the downslope of his career. So you're paying a lot of money for somebody whose ideas and whose philosophies and whose approach is coming to the end of its time. So that, to me, is a bad decision, right? And I know that we won the last two seasons, but again, how much of that is down to the resource disparity, and how much is that down to the personal impact of Brendan Rodgers? What I will say, to be balanced, is that there are aspects of how Celtic play, and I'm kind of straying off the point here, apologies. There are aspects of how Celtic play that are down to Brendan Rodgers, and we're good at it. And this is where we're in a situation now where we've got Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney who are tinkering with that, And I have real concerns that, again, we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater and changing some stuff that, we're actually, why are we changing that? We're good at that bit. Don't change the stuff we're good at. Change the stuff we're not good at. Yeah. But so, sorry, I'm straying off the point. Apologies for that.
Not at all, because I do want to speak before the end of the show, Alan, about the changes that have been made in terms of our approach to not just domestic games, but Midtjylland, and what we might have should have done better when it came to Midtjylland, why that kind of fell to bits, and the disparity between going out there and beating Rangers, Falkirk and Kilmarnock versus the Midtjylland scenario. So I would do it, because I know you've been talking about that on the Huddle Breakdown as well. Some great comments coming in. Always brilliant to see you. Thank you all. I'm delighted, says Combo, that you have Alan on. We are always delighted to welcome Alan into the fray. And it's great also to have Chris. I'm delighted Chris is available today, because there were a few issues the other day with audio, and it can be quite stressful when you're the guy at the helm, Chris. So thanks for dealing with that. I just decided, because of the issues with audio, let's just clip 22 minutes. That's 22 minutes you'll never see again. It's gone into the ether. We'll never know what was said in those 22 minutes.
I don't think anyone will complain about seeing less than me on the pod, so I'm happy with that. That's fine.
Too humble. Here we go. Paddy Lavery, always an absolute pleasure to see you in the chat. They may take your lives, but they'll never take your Acsom. You're right. You're absolutely spot on. Now, Norrie boy, I'll tell you something right now, right? What you've just said there about Knutson. If everything we've spoken about today is the way that Celtic approach this, I hope we get him too, because that would mean, in order for it to be a success, we would need to restructure. So if we restructure the football department and we get someone like Knutson in, and then moving forward, let's say in 3 years, because let's be honest, it's normally a 3-year cycle, we bring in another manager, we've got a system that we can then look for a manager to fit the system. So Norrie, I agree. I like what Knutson's done, but I think he's part of a bigger picture. And if we can buy into that, I would be absolutely delighted. Jerry Burns, until we get new blood in at boardroom, change ain't going to happen. Well, there's obviously a lot to be discussed between now and the 21st when it comes to the boardroom, because an AGM is almost upon us. I spoke to Jeanette Finlay earlier on this week, and we decided actually to put this as Acsom out early this week, because there was a big meeting at Gracie's last night, a drop-in of anyone who wants to know more about their shareholding and how they could use their proxy or give that vote to the Celtic Trust for the forthcoming AGM. And if you didn't make that meeting yesterday, you can still email Jeanette and her team. You can find them on the socials, and we'll share the details before the 21st as well. So that's actually gone out, which means we don't have any other entertainment tonight, unless you want me to dial in Jamie O'Hara for round 2. And I don't plan to do that. Jungle Line, I've seen this talk of Evan Ferguson. You mentioned it actually on the WhatsApp group earlier, Chris, on loan in January, would suit Celtic to a T, said Jungle Line, who's watched a lot of them, because he's always injured. Right. And that's a player that obviously has come from Irish football and has done really, really well, but his loan deal hasn't worked out. Sometimes that's at that stage of the career that we can actually welcome a player like that into the fold. We'll see how that goes. But well done, Scales, last night. Liam Scales, unfancied Celtic defender who's done particularly well. From an observer's perspective, Chris, what are we doing differently since Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney came in? Obviously, we were on a bit of a situation where we've lost 2 games on the bounce, which doesn't happen very often domestically. But in between that, a European game was sandwiched, and that was a game that I thought we played pretty well and we got a good result in. But obviously, after the Hearts game, Brendan leaves. He's given us all these things that are difficult. They're difficult to gauge, and that's like a bounce and momentum and confidence and all this kind of stuff. The mood seems better, and we've won 3 domestic games. What have you seen though, in terms of what we're doing differently as a fan? What have we done differently since Martin and Sean have taken the reins?
Well, I mean, I think it's important not to get too carried away, because like the issues that the squad were suffering, injury, loss of form, loss of confidence, maybe lack of impetus to an extent. I think they're not things that are fixed overnight. But I think what Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney were able to do, I think first and foremost, was simplify it. I think we simplified it from a player's perspective. Now, this is just an observation based on what I'm seeing on the park and how I'm seeing players react. But suddenly players look as though they're playing with more confidence. They look more comfortable in terms of the role they're playing. I think, if you take the Midtjylland game out of the equation a little bit, because I don't think we were equipped for Europe this season. And I think Midtjylland was evidence of that. And we've spoken about how well Midtjylland has structured the team, manager and coaches and everything in alignment, etc. And good recruitment. And I think it did highlight some of our deficiencies. But domestically, we're where we should be. We're, outscoring, outplaying, dominating possession, looking a bit more physical and a bit more capable as well. Now, I always think that there's a thing in management where you can over coach players. You can give players so many instructions that by the time they get on the park, they don't know, am I going forward, am I going sideways, am I going backwards, what am I doing? Football shouldn't be a complicated game, right? And players should understand the role. And one of the things that really comes across when you listen to Martin O'Neill, whether you're listening to him at an event, an Acsom event, for example, which I've been fortunate enough to listen to him twice and be in his company, is he brings that element of slightly old school style coaching.
Yeah.
Just go out there and enjoy it. Just go out there and show what you can do. And I'm always reminded of the old quote that I think was on the old treble DVD back in the early 2000s. And it's players like Bobby Petta, a guy who, his career was going nowhere at Celtic. And he said, Martin O'Neill just came in and just said, just go and run at the player. Go and do what you can do. Show me what you can do. And it's about giving players confidence and self-belief. It's not going to solve the problems with recruitment. It's not going to solve the problems with, trying to, fit into a completely different system. But it's just about, look, you're a good player, son. Go out there and do it. And I think that's what they've done. As Alan quite rightly said, they're tinkering. They're tinkering a little bit at the moment. They're not doing open heart surgery, but they're just tinkering. Just trying to fix things that can be fixed in the short term. If Martin and Sean get longer, if that's the direction that the club decides to go, and then we get to the end of the season, get a recruitment window, I think maybe they'll make, more obvious and more evident changes to team structure and tactics and that kind of thing. But I think, what Martin's done largely, and then credit to Sean Maloney for undoubtedly what's his part in this as well, he's steadied the ship. And I think that's a sign of an experienced, tenured coach who understands what it takes to get the best out of players. And I think that's what we needed at this particular time.
I do agree with what you said there about Martin O'Neill. I also think there's a real balance to be had, and that's where Sean Maloney comes in. Even just after the 90 minutes of the semi-final, you could see who was doing the team talk. You knew that Sean Maloney's played a massive part in this. And perhaps, and I'm going to throw this because when you look at his managerial pedigree, as a number one, if you like, for Sean Maloney, it's not great. But obviously he has coached at an elite level. He has coached, when you're talking about his time at Belgium, etc. He's coached at an elite level when it comes to that. When you look at the mix, Alan, of old school and modern coach, is that what we've got at the moment? Because Martin O'Neill does talk very in basic terms when it comes to what he wants his players to do. But then you do have the modern coach, if you like, in Sean Maloney, who might refine it quite a bit. So you've got a figurehead and a proper coach. Is that why this is working on a domestic, in a domestic sense, at least, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't even, and I just warn people now, contrarianism alert. So here we go. Right, I wouldn't even frame it that way, right? Because football tactics, approach to playing football, I wouldn't say it's cyclical. It's more like a helix, really. So here we are, 2025, and we're seeing 3-5-2, direct football, long throws into the box, right? So, I mean, Martin O'Neill would probably resemble quite a lot of that and recognise a lot of that from when he was a coach. So in that respect, I'm not sure it's an issue that he's 73 years old, hasn't coached for all these years. It's all about solving problems and using the resources that you've got most effectively. That's really what it comes down to. And I think, what we saw against Falkirk was actually, and I agree with Chris, he simplified it. And they really did three things, I would say, tactically. Number one, they pushed the team about 3 or 4 yards further up the pitch. For some reason, under Brendan Rodgers this season, we dropped back. Our average defensive line distance had fallen back for the first time. It had been creeping forward under Ange, and under Brendan, we played even higher. We were one of the highest defensive lines in the Champions League last season, and we'd fallen back this season. So we pushed up again. So we squeezed the game a little bit more. He asked the wingers and the fullbacks to be wider, so we got more width into the game. and we played an awful lot more direct football. The number of completed passes that we had against Falkirk was statistically significantly less than over the last 5 years. It was quite a big change from a data perspective. Really, it was quite a radical change actually in that game. Now it's Falkirk at home, right? Fine, okay. Now we go on to the League Cup semi-final, and I think it started well. We played similar football. We stretched the game. We played in behind the wing backs, which made complete sense, and they specifically targeted their right-hand side of defence with Giga and Tavernier, which is the weakest part of their defensive structure, rightly, and we dominated the game. And the pressing was excellent, and we kind of hemmed them in, got the lead, got a player up. What happened after that, though, I think was a tactical misstep. At that point, being a goal and a man up, you should be basically the way this should play out. Ideally, is you suffocate the game, you win 2-0, everyone 90 minutes. It's relatively straightforward, and we all go home. Not the drama that we had, the extra time and all that sort of stuff. It was unnecessary, and it was down to largely the way we set up. We'd let the game become too much of a basketball match. We didn't exert enough control over the game. You have to give Danny Rule credit. He kept 2 players up front. They kept trying to get the ball forward. Fair enough. But Celtic's core strength in terms of the game model for the last 5 seasons has been the ability to squeeze the game, to press and counter press very effectively, and to keep possession and almost defend with the ball. Now, before anyone accuses me of wanting to go back to the horseshoe futility, I'm not saying that. I'm talking about a basic foundational level game model. The horseshoe futility is a lifestyle choice within that framework. I'm talking about not changing the framework. And if we'd stuck to that template, and if you look at the metrics for Celtic at the Champions League level last season and the Europa League level this season, we are one of the top teams in Europe at pressing and counter-pressing. We play one of the highest lines in Europe, and we exert one of the highest levels of control with the ball. These are things that we are good at. The team is good at. The players are good at. They know what they're doing. They're organised. So don't change that. I don't mind being more direct. I don't mind more, diagonals. I don't mind more crosses into the box earlier, but within that framework. And they tinkered with that, and we became stretched. And we didn't exert enough control to see out that semi-final. So that was a misstep, but with all the fairy dust of Derby wins and getting to a cup final, and Martin O'Neill, who I love and adore, and Sean Maloney the same, that kind of got glossed over. However, it didn't get glossed over in Midtjylland, right? It fell apart in one of the most abject displays I've ever seen from a Celtic team in Europe. It is up there with Dortmund last season. Dortmund last season, Rodgers got ahead of himself. He saw that Dortmund had played quite badly in 2 or 3 games leading up to that game and thought, right, we can stand toe-to-toe with these. And we got absolutely ripped apart by the speed and movement of their attacking players. And to be fair to Rodgers, he rectified that, and he didn't do that again. And we got through, and we put up some good defensive performances along the way. So fair play to him. Strike one, but he learned. So I'm hoping that Maloney and O'Neill learn from what happened in Midtjylland, because that was a tactical disaster. That's all on them. Because again, they stopped doing what the team was good at. Our most creative player was Kasper Schmeichel. He played the most progressive passes, pack passes, as I call them, but constantly shelling the ball forward. The game was stretched beyond recognition. And guess who had arguably the worst game he ever had in a Celtic shirt? Callum McGregor. If you put Callum McGregor in the middle of the pitch with nobody around him, not only can you not cover the space defensively, you've lost your major orchestrator who, with the ball, builds the play because he's in close physical connection to his teammates, and he can pass short and set tempo. If you stretch the play, you can't do that anymore. And that's what we did. And guess what? Midtjylland are one of the best teams at that level, probably the best team at that level, at playing this kind of chaos ball, this very kind of vertical, fast, get the ball forward, get it out wide, bang in crosses, lots of speed, lots of action, lots of pressing, counter pressing. Very little structure at the game. They're masters at that. So we basically took them on at their own game that we don't play. Right, we're one of the best teams at being compact, at keeping possession, at controlling space, and at controlling the ball. And we abandoned it to play chaos ball with one of the best chaos ball teams in the tournament, and we got absolutely hammered. And the penalty at the end completely distorts the XG picture. And by the way, they took off the 3 best attackers after 58 minutes.
Yeah,
They pretty much took their foot off the gas, right? It was up there. That was as bad a display and as one-sided a match as 6-0 in Madrid, 7-1 in Paris, 7 in Barcelona, etc. It was of that ilk, and of course Midtjylland are nowhere near the level of the teams that I've mentioned. So that is a red flag for me, and that's strike one from a tactical perspective. So then we came back to Kilmarnock, and at the weekend, and we actually played more of a controlled game that you would probably recognise as being Celtic under Rodgers, with a little tweak, which I thought it was only a small tweak, but it was a really effective one, which is rather than horseshoe the ball around the back four, we were always missing out a player. So we would always go to the next player. We'd always go to the next player with our lateral passing, and it just opened up the angles quicker. And that small change I thought was very smart, very Sean Maloney, I think, and it just allowed us to control the game, but open up space a little bit quicker. So that's a take, and that's like, I hope that's progress. But I think we'll see against Feyenoord and Roma. Have we learned? Have they learned? And have they, have they again, to overuse the phrase, not throwing out the baby with the bathwater in terms of stopping doing what Celtic are actually good at?
Listen, Alan, JP Mason mentioned that he'd listened in to one of your shows, and he was talking about some of the stuff you've mentioned there. So thanks for padding that out and explaining it to us, because, again, I've said this before, I'm not an analyst when it comes to football. I'm an observer. And I often, Chris, I can look at something and make an observation and say, I noticed this, but Alan can tell me why it happened. And that's why I love to hear your take on it, Alan. So thanks very much for that. And also, it's very interesting to hear that was up there with some of the worst performances. And as you say, maybe masked by the fact that we get a goal back, they take off 3 of their best players, etc. as well. But it just shows you the unique nature of this Celtic job, Chris, when you look at our next 2 away games, or our next 2 games, both away from home. First one's against St Mirren and Paisley, the next one's Feyenoord in Rotterdam, and we're expected to win both of those games. That's what you need to do if you're coming in as a Celtic manager. You need to find a way to do something in both of these games. It is a unique game, Scottish football. We know why we're hamstrung. We know why certain leagues are stronger than us, Chris. But I think that feeds into the frustration when we seem to be doing well. If you look at the Champions League campaign last season, yeah, there was a couple of red flags, as Alan's mentioned there. But as a campaign, you're looking at it going, that's positive. We can build on this. That's why it's so frustrating when we don't, because we know how difficult it is to attain in the first place, that when you then take a backward step, you think, you know what, it could take us 5 campaigns to get back to where we were.
Yes. Yeah, it should have been a baseline moment, or a benchmark moment, rather, maybe is a better term there. You know, what we did against Bayern Munich, that should have suddenly became the minimum target for the next 1, 2, 3, 4 seasons. You know, continual entry into the Champions League, you know, which you attain through domestic dominance. So we should have made sure we planned for domestic dominance, get the qualification into the Champions League, hopefully with a fully prepared and fully recruited effective squad and a manager getting what he wants. And then, you know, your target is to say, okay, we get within a hair of the next round, or we get into the next round and we say, right, that's it, target achieved. How do we build to get to the next point? And it's, you know, nobody's looking for us to go in there and get straight to the final or win a European trophy. You know, at this stage, what we want to see is incremental but obvious progress towards that milestone. You want to see us, you know, become regular fixtures within the Champions League. I want to see Gary Lineker and Alan Shearer talking about Celtic games in such positive terms as they did that season. I want to see Celtic mentioned amongst the most exciting fixtures in the Champions League, and generating that interest, because you're growing the profile of the club as well, and you're stopping people like Jamie O'Hara denigrating our club and our football, right? So
you took that full circle there. You brought Jamie back in.
I did, but that's the point, because we want to change this perception that we should be fortunate to even be in the Europe's top table. No, the profile of our club is that we deserve to be there. But we need to demonstrate that we deserve to be there by having a well-structured, well thought out, aligned and modern progressive footballing structure and operation behind the scenes. It's not just about bringing in the manager, right? We could bring in Jose Mourinho, or we could bring in, you could bring in Jurgen Klopp at this point. But he will not be successful unless he has got the tools to do the job as effectively as possible. Those guys have had that at certain clubs. When they haven't, it's not gone well. So I don't mind, and I'm not going to denigrate a Wilfred Nancy or a Kjell Knutsen or a McKenna or Hine or anyone else that's mentioned. I mean, if Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney get the job for the next 2 years, I'm perfectly fine with that. But give them the tools to do the job, to allow us to progress as a footballing club and a footballing entity at Europe's top table, because that's where we belong. And I'm not trying to sound arrogant there. I want all of Scottish football to elevate itself. I just don't want Scottish football to become more competitive because we're dropping, because we are refusing to increase that gap. I want us to drag Scottish football up. I don't want us to be dragged down by our own lack of ambition, because that ultimately will hurt Scottish football as a whole as well.
The thing with that is, if you do well in Europe, then it filters down, because obviously the prize money filters back into Scottish football. In relation to what we think as a group, there are, I think, 30 odd now in the Acsom group chat. We ran a wee poll in relation to who we think should be the next manager of Celtic, and I will be sharing the outcome of that very, very soon. Was it a landslide, Chris? When was the last time you checked it? It was just a 24-hour poll that I did. Most people got involved in it. And I've got to say, I was the only person that voted for Kieran McKenna. Kieran McKenna, I was the only guy. There you go. I saw literally vote for Kieran McKenna. There were no votes for Nonce. Knutsen got the majority of the votes. Hyen got quite a few votes. And then there was also the option of someone else and name who. And I do believe Rose was getting quite a lot of votes off the beaten track. Yep,
I think so. Rose is quite popular. I think the other one was a couple of people. I think I'd mentioned Thiago Motta and Jurgen Klopp as well, but more from an aspirational sense. If we're looking at profile, these are the kind of guys I would like to see. It's not saying that's who we'll get, which I think is important. I mean, look, it's like I said, and I think it's been mentioned a few times, and I think Alan's made the point far better, more effectively than I could. It doesn't matter who you bring in; you need to give them the structure to do the job properly. So there's more required than just hiring a manager. We need to hire a manager and give him the environment to be successful. And as I say, Alan, I think, has made that point in most effective and strongest terms.
Yeah, without a doubt. The Flying Haggis comes in. Always great to see you, Flying Haggis. Football from the 70s is the best era, in my opinion. Pure natural talent being allowed to express itself. That was the Martin O'Neill School of Learning. I always remember Neil Lenning saying that Paddy McCourt was a throwback to the 70s. What other player, modern day player, do you think would have thrived in that environment? Flying Haggis, let us know in the comment section. This is great, says Pete McGee. Helps me understand what's actually going on in a game. And I've been watching Celtic for 70 plus years. He is, of course, talking about Alan Morrison coming in to share a lot of your views, Alan, on the data and analytical side of football. And we always appreciate you coming in. Can we get him a job at Celtic? Have they been on the phone yet? Have they been in touch yet, Alan?
We are in. The club is in huge trouble. If that's no. Just so I'd be contrarian again, but I've decided that's my role today. Is that comment about football in the 70s? Martin O'Neill, of course, his most significant football career was at Nottingham Forest under Brian Clough, and Nottingham Forest under Brian Clough were an exceptionally well organised, counter-attacking, pressing team. So it was very kind of modern, you might almost say, in terms of the way that they played. So that's how Martin O'Neill learned his football, and really the power of teamwork. It was a team without stars. Actually, they won the European Cup twice. They got straight from the English second tier up to the first tier and won the English top division. 2 European Cups with a team almost devoid of stars. Had a little bit of magic dust with John Robertson on the left wing, but it was a team of hard-working, well-organised professionals that could play pretty nasty when they had to, and they could defend with their lives, and they could counter-attack. And that was their style of play. And that's how Martin O'Neill learned to play football.
Alan, just on that, it'd be interesting, maybe an interesting comparison, because that Nottingham Forest team was really successful. Martin O'Neill had success at Derby prior to that, but then not Martin O'Neill, sorry, Brian Clough had success at Derby prior to that. But obviously Leeds is famous for not working out, and it was the one job he didn't have Peter Taylor or the usual structure that he had in place. It'd be interesting to see a comparison of what was so successful before and after Leeds, but whereas Leeds was so so unsuccessful.
Yeah, I mean, well, Peter Taylor's a big part of it, I think. And by the way, I think we underestimate that this was Brendan Rodgers' first managerial job without Chris Davis, and I think we underappreciate the value that Chris Davis brought. That sort of team effort that he brought. Chris Davis was far more observant and reactive in games to what was actually happening than I think Brendan Rodgers was. Just on the comment about you talked about Newts, and just an analogy that sprung to mind. And again, I've got to give credit to James for this rather than me. I'm pinching this from him. But just to bring my concerns about Knudsen to life a little bit. Us taking Knudsen out of Bodø/Glimt, slotting him into Celtic, to me, the risk is that'd be a very similar scenario to when you've got the situation in England where Tony Bloom owns Brighton. They have all this smart analysis, recruitment, but it's the whole organisation. Every single role in the organisation. There are three names on a list that would replace them if they left. Right, that's how well organised they are. And Chelsea, I think Chelsea at one point were just like, well, we can't be bothered recruiting, so we'll just buy players from Brighton. We'll let them do the hard work, and then when they're successful, we'll just take their players. And they bought 4 or 5 players off of Brighton on that basis. And I think they had Graham Potter. They took Graham Potter, the manager, from Brighton to Chelsea, and he was a disaster because what made Graham Potter a great manager at Brighton was everything about Brighton. It wasn't necessarily Graham Potter. So and I think we'd be in a very similar position if we took Knudsen out of Bodø/Glimt, and we see this with the players. That team that absolutely battered Ange's side, they sold a lot of those players, and not many of them have been successful. The standout player for me was Vettelsen in midfield, and he went to Club Brugge, and he's a squad player. He was in the bench for a lot of their games. The young lad, the winger who tore us apart, went to Roma, and that didn't work out for him. And I think he might have gone back to the club. Anyway, players like Patrick Berg, I think, went back to the club. Anyway, so they're taking the players out of the Bodø/Glimt model, performing the roles that they're playing, that they were specifically being trained to play in, and putting them into another random club, rarely works. And that would be my concern with Knudsen. Just look at the career of Graham Potter since he left Brighton.
It's a very good example. So thank you to yourself and Juco James as well. The Huddle Breakdown, you can find you all over social media and on YouTube, of course. Always a pleasure to have you on Acsom, Alan. Thanks everybody for getting involved. Over 2,000 of you today on this Friday afternoon. There's no Celtic, obviously, this weekend, but you might want to watch some international football. And if anything big happens, Chris and I might jump on for a wee emergency broadcast. Thank you, everybody, for getting involved. Thank you to Chris and also Alan for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.